My mother-in-law tried to break up my marriage, so I broke up her entire family. When I married Derek, his mother Vivian made it clear I wasn't good enough for her precious son. I was a public school teacher from a working-class family who shopped at Target, drove a Honda Civic, and had never set foot in a country club. She was old money with a trust fund, multiple properties, and very strong opinions about bloodlines and social standing. The passive aggression started the moment Derek proposed. She insisted on meeting my parents at an expensive restaurant she knew they couldn't afford, then made subtle comments about the importance of financial compatibility in marriage. She asked my father what he did for work, then pursed her lips when he mentioned managing a hardware store. She questioned my mother about our family's medical history, as if she was screening livestock for breeding purposes. During that first dinner, she made a point of ordering the most expensive wine on the menu, then commenting loudly about how important it was to appreciate quality when you could afford it. She asked detailed questions about my parents' retirement plans, their mortgage status, and whether anyone in my family had attended college. Every question was designed to highlight the class differences between our families. Wedding planning became her personal war zone where every decision I made was somehow inadequate. She changed our venue behind my back because the original location wasn't prestigious enough for the family's reputation. She uninvited half my family claiming space limitations, then mysteriously found room for 36 of her country club friends who barely knew Derek. She told the florist I had terrible taste and upgraded all my simple arrangements to elaborate displays that tripled our budget without consulting me. When I tried to maintain some control over my own wedding, she'd cry to Derek about how I was excluding her from her only son's special day. She'd show him photos of elaborate weddings in magazines, sighing about how she'd always dreamed of giving Derek a proper celebration. Derek would cave every time, begging me to let his mother help because planning a wedding was so stressful, and she had experience with these things. She replaced my chosen photographer with someone from her social circle who specialized in society weddings. She upgraded our catering to include dishes I'd never heard of and couldn't pronounce. She even tried to change my wedding dress, claiming the one I'd chosen was too simple for a family wedding, and offering to pay for something more appropriate from an expensive boutique. The day of our wedding, she wore a cream-colored dress that photographed almost white in the church lighting. She insisted on walking down the aisle before me, claiming it was a family tradition for the groom's mother to make an entrance. During the reception, she gave a speech about how marriage changes people, and she hoped Derek would always remember his family's values and heritage. She made sure the photographer captured her in every important shot, positioning herself between Derek and me whenever possible. At the reception, she held court at her table, telling stories about Derek's childhood to guests who didn't know him well, painting herself as the devoted mother who had sacrificed everything for her son's success. She made subtle comments about how young marriages often struggled when people came from different backgrounds, and how important family support would be during our adjustment period. After the wedding, the boundary violations became a daily assault on my sanity. She had somehow convinced Derek to give her a key to our house for emergencies, though she couldn't explain what emergencies she thought might occur that wouldn't warrant calling first. I'd come home to find my furniture rearranged because the feng shui was blocking positive energy from flowing to Derek. She'd throw away my groceries and replace them with organic alternatives from Whole Foods because my food choices were slowly poisoning her son with chemicals and preservatives. She'd reorganize my kitchen cabinets according to her system, claiming she was helping me learn proper household management. She'd replace my cleaning supplies with expensive organic products, explaining that harsh chemicals could affect fertility. She'd even rearrange my closet, moving Derek's clothes to the prime locations and pushing mine to the back corners. When I changed the locks after finding her going through my personal papers, she showed up at Derek's office in tears, claiming I was trying to cut her out of his life. She told him she felt like a stranger in her own son's home and worried that marriage was changing him into someone cold and distant. Derek gave her a new key that same day, then lectured me about respecting his mother's place in our family. The psychological warfare was constant, but surgical in its precision. She'd compliment my outfit, then add that it was so brave of me to wear horizontal stripes with my figure. She'd praise my cooking, then casually mention how Derek's ex-girlfriend had been such a phenomenal chef and ask if I'd ever considered taking cooking classes. Every family dinner included detailed stories about successful women Derek could have married. Doctors, lawyers, socialites. If he hadn't settled for someone so ordinary, she'd bring up Derek's ex-girlfriend constantly, always in seemingly innocent contexts. She'd mention running into her at the grocery store and how successful her medical practice had become. She'd share news about the ex's achievements, her beautiful home, her travel adventures. She'd wonder aloud why Derek had never brought her around anymore, since she'd been such a lovely girl from such a good family. She'd reminisce about Derek's childhood while looking directly at me, talking about how she'd always imagined his future wife would understand the family's traditions and social obligations. She'd mention charity galas and cultural events that I'd obviously never attended, then suggest that Derek might need to start going alone since I wouldn't feel comfortable in those circles. During family gatherings, she'd seat me away from Derek, claiming she was mixing up the seating to help everyone get to know each other better. She'd place him next to family friends' daughters or successful women from her social circle, then spend the evening pointing out how much they had in common with Derek, and how naturally they fit into the family dynamic. When Derek defended me, she'd immediately switch tactics. Her eyes would fill with tears and she'd clutch her chest, mentioning her heart condition and how stress was making it worse. She'd talk about how she felt like she was losing her son and didn't understand why wanting the best for him was being treated as a crime. Derek would spend the rest of the evening comforting her while I sat there feeling like the villain for existing. She'd schedule regular mother-son lunches and dinners, always when I was at work and couldn't join them. She'd use these private moments to plant seeds of doubt about our marriage, wondering if I was really making Derek happy or if he felt trapped by early marriage. She'd remind him of his goals and dreams, questioning whether I was supportive enough of his ambitions. The reproductive pressure began subtly during our first year of marriage. She'd ask innocent questions about our timeline for starting a family, then mention how much she was looking forward to being a grandmother. When we said we wanted to wait a few years to establish our careers, she'd nod understandingly, then launch into stories about fertility declining with age and how she'd been blessed to have Derek when she was young and healthy. She'd share articles about career women who'd waited too long to have children, always with a concerned expression about how tragic it was when people prioritized work over family. She'd mention friends whose daughters-in-law had struggled with fertility after focusing on careers during their prime childbearing years. Every family gathering became an interrogation about my reproductive status. She'd ask if I was feeling tired or nauseous, examining my face for signs of pregnancy. She'd comment on what I was drinking, noting that I was having wine so I must not be expecting yet. She'd ask Derek privately if everything was okay between us, wondering if stress from work was affecting our ability to conceive. She began inviting pregnant family members and friends to every gathering, filling our conversations with baby talk and pregnancy stories. She'd coo over ultrasound photos and ask detailed questions about morning sickness, weight gain, and nursery preparations. She'd make sure I was included in these conversations, watching my reactions and commenting on how much I'd learned from these experienced mothers. The manipulation escalated when we actively started trying for a baby. She'd leave fertility pamphlets on my kitchen counter with sections highlighted about age-related fertility decline, even though I was only 28. She'd clip newspaper articles about new fertility treatments and email me links to success stories about women who'd struggled to conceive until they tried specific diets or supplements. She began researching fertility specialists and nutritionists, creating a comprehensive list of experts she thought I should consult. She'd leave business cards on my kitchen table with notes about how these doctors had helped other family friends overcome fertility challenges. She'd offer to pay for consultations, claiming that money shouldn't be a barrier to giving Derek the family he deserved. She began recommending her personal gynecologist for my annual exams, claiming her doctor was the absolute best in the city and had helped several family friends with fertility issues. When I politely declined, wanting to stay with my current doctor, she'd mention it to Derek as evidence that I wasn't taking our family planning seriously. She'd suggest that maybe I had underlying health issues I was hiding, and that's why I didn't want to see a specialist. She started hosting dinner parties where the conversation inevitably turned to pregnancy and childbirth. She'd invite couples with young children, then spend the evening discussing the joys of parenthood and how empty life felt without children. She'd ask these parents to share their conception stories, fertility struggles, and pregnancy experiences in excruciating detail while watching my face for reactions. The sabotage became more overt as months passed without a pregnancy announcement. She'd invite Derek to family events and conveniently forget to mention I was included, then act shocked and hurt when I didn't show up. She'd schedule important family dinners on nights she knew I had work obligations, then tell everyone I was too career-focused to prioritize family. She convinced Derek's siblings that I was keeping him away from family gatherings, systematically poisoning them against me before I'd even done anything wrong. She started hosting dinner parties where she'd seat Derek next to attractive single women, claiming she was just trying to expand our social circle. She'd invite couples where the wives were obviously pregnant or had young children, then spend the evening talking about how fulfilling motherhood was and how empty life felt without children. She'd ask these women to share their pregnancy stories in excruciating detail while watching my face for reactions. She began making comments about how marriage was supposed to bring families together, not drive them apart. She'd wonder aloud why I seemed uncomfortable at family gatherings, suggesting that maybe I wasn't really committed to becoming part of their family. She'd tell Derek that she was worried I was too independent and career-focused to really settle into married life. When those tactics didn't produce immediate results, she escalated to medical interference. She'd call my doctor's office pretending to be me, trying to get information about my appointment schedule and test results. She'd research fertility specialists online and print out their information, leaving it in my purse or car with notes about how she just wanted to help me explore all my options. She began hosting coffee dates with Derek's female cousins and family friends, pumping them for information about their pregnancies and childbirth experiences. Then she'd relay every detail to me, complete with advice about prenatal vitamins, morning sickness remedies, and the importance of staying calm during pregnancy for the baby's development. She was preparing herself to be the expert on my future pregnancy before it even happened. She started making subtle comments about my lifestyle choices, wondering if my work stress might be affecting my fertility. She'd suggest that maybe I should consider reducing my hours or taking a leave of absence to focus on getting pregnant. She'd mention studies about how stress hormones could interfere with conception, always with a concerned expression about my well-being. When I finally got pregnant after 8 months of trying, she somehow made that milestone entirely about her experience. She announced our news at Derek's office Christmas party before we'd had a chance to tell anyone, claiming she was just so excited to finally be a grandmother. She immediately started planning an elaborate baby shower without consulting me, inviting all her friends and none of mine, creating a guest list that read like a social register. Her announcement at the Christmas party was particularly humiliating because she made it sound like she'd been waiting forever for us to give her a grandchild. She told Derek's colleagues that she'd been praying for this blessing and how grateful she was that I'd finally gotten pregnant. The implication was that our 8 months of trying had been an unusually long struggle, making me feel like I'd failed at something basic. Her obsession with controlling every aspect of my pregnancy became suffocating. She'd show up at my doctor appointments uninvited, claiming she wanted to support me through this important time. She'd call my OB/GYN office pretending to be me to get updates on my progress and ask questions about my care. When I told the medical staff to only discuss my information with me directly, she complained to Derek that I was being secretive about his own child's health. She began researching every aspect of pregnancy and childbirth, printing articles about proper nutrition, exercise routines, and labor preparation. She'd leave these materials around my house with sections highlighted and her own notes written in the margins. She'd quiz me about my prenatal vitamin intake and suggest additional supplements she'd read about online. She started monitoring my eating habits, commenting on everything I consumed, and offering suggestions about pregnancy nutrition. She'd bring me special teas and smoothie recipes, claiming they were essential for the baby's development. She'd criticize my food choices at family dinners, explaining to everyone how important proper nutrition was during pregnancy. She began shopping for baby items without consulting me, showing up with expensive clothes, furniture, and accessories that didn't match the style Derek and I had chosen. When I tried to return items or suggest alternatives, she'd act hurt and tell Derek that I was ungrateful for her generosity and excitement about becoming a grandmother. The boundary violations reached new levels when she tried to dictate my birth plan. She insisted I needed to deliver at the exclusive private hospital where Derek was born, not the perfectly good hospital covered by our insurance. She claimed their family had a relationship with the best doctors there, and I owed it to the baby to have the finest medical care available. When I refused to switch hospitals, she offered to pay the difference, then told Derek I was being stubborn about accepting help for our child. She wanted to be in the delivery room because she claimed she had a right to witness her grandchild's birth. She'd help deliver Derek, she said, and it was a family tradition for grandmothers to be present. When I firmly refused, she cried to Derek about being excluded from the most important moment of her life. She threatened to stand in the hospital hallway if necessary, because nothing would keep her from being there when her grandchild arrived. She began discussing postpartum plans without including me in the conversation. She talked to Derek about how I'd need help after the baby was born, suggesting that she should move in for the first few months to assist with childcare and household management. She'd research postpartum depression statistics and share articles about how new mothers often struggled with mental health, implying that I'd need professional supervision. By my third trimester, I was mentally and physically exhausted from constantly defending my choices. Every decision about the nursery became a battle. She wanted traditional colors instead of the gender-neutral yellow we'd chosen. She criticized our choice of baby names, suggesting family names that sounded stuffy and old-fashioned. She questioned my plans for maternity leave, wondering how I could possibly go back to work when the baby needed its mother. She'd show up with paint samples and fabric swatches for the nursery, ignoring our design preferences and pushing her own vision of what a proper baby room should look like. She'd rearrange furniture we'd already positioned, claiming she knew better about safety and feng shui. She'd replace items we'd chosen with more expensive alternatives, then act hurt when we didn't appreciate her improvements. She'd undermine my parenting decisions before the baby was even born, telling Derek that I was too inexperienced to know what was best. She'd mention how she'd raised 3 successful children and knew what worked. She'd offer to move in for the first few months to help with the baby, completely ignoring my horrified expression when she made this suggestion. The manipulation became so constant that I felt like I was drowning. Derek couldn't see it because she was careful to be sweet and helpful whenever he was around. To him, she was just an excited grandmother who wanted to be involved. He'd accuse me of being hormonal and unreasonable when I tried to explain how suffocating her behavior had become. She'd make comments about how pregnancy was affecting my judgment and decision-making abilities, suggesting that I wasn't thinking clearly about what was best for the baby. She'd tell Derek that pregnant women often became irrational, and that he needed to be patient with my mood swings and poor choices. The breaking point came when I was 8 months pregnant and having a particularly difficult day with back pain and swollen feet. I decided to leave work early to rest at home, something my doctor had encouraged me to do when I felt overwhelmed. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed her car was already there, which wasn't unusual anymore since Derek had given her yet another key after our latest fight about boundaries. I walked into my own house expecting to find her in the kitchen or living room arranging flowers or organizing something, but the main floor was empty. I heard noise coming from upstairs and found her in my home office, going through my filing cabinet with systematic precision. She had my medical records spread across my desk and was photographing each page with her phone. My prenatal test results, my prescription information, my insurance paperwork, my therapy notes from college, everything was laid out like evidence in a criminal investigation. When she saw me standing in the doorway, she didn't even look embarrassed or guilty. She just smiled that same sweet smile and explained that she was organizing my paperwork since pregnancy brain was obviously making me so forgetful and disorganized. She claimed Derek had asked her to help me get ready for maternity leave since I was clearly too overwhelmed to handle administrative tasks myself. That's when I noticed my laptop was open to my email account. She'd been reading through months of correspondence, my messages with my doctor about pregnancy concerns, my emails to my sister about feeling overwhelmed by her behavior, my work communications about maternity leave plans, even personal messages between Derek and me. She'd been systematically gathering intelligence about every aspect of my life for months. I could see browser tabs open to my online banking, my social media accounts, and even my Amazon purchase history. She'd been tracking my spending, monitoring my online activity, and reading my private communications with friends and family. The violation felt overwhelming and nauseating. I demanded that she leave my house immediately. She refused, claiming Derek had given her permission to be there, and she was just trying to help prepare for the baby's arrival. When I threatened to call the police, she actually laughed and said no one would believe I was calling the cops on an elderly grandmother who was just trying to help her pregnant daughter-in-law with paperwork. But as she started packing up my medical records to leave, she made a crucial mistake. She forgot to close a document that was open on my laptop, a detailed spreadsheet she'd created to track every aspect of my pregnancy and behavior. The file was titled Concerns About Derek's Wife and contained months of meticulous documentation. The spreadsheet had columns for dates, my pregnancy symptoms, my emotional responses to various situations, my interactions with Derek, and my reactions to her suggestions and advice. She'd been documenting everything she could potentially use against me, including my objections to her boundary violations, which she'd labeled as paranoid behavior and possible postpartum depression warning signs. She'd noted every time I seemed tired, emotional, or stressed, describing these normal pregnancy experiences as evidence of mental instability. She'd recorded arguments Derek and I had, conversations she'd overheard, and changes in my routine or behavior. She'd even documented my food choices, exercise habits, and social interactions, building a comprehensive case that I was unfit to be a mother. The level of detail was chilling. She'd recorded the exact times I'd gone to bed and woken up, what I'd eaten for breakfast, how long my showers lasted, and whether I'd seemed happy or sad during phone conversations she'd eavesdropped on. She'd documented my pregnancy symptoms as signs of weakness and instability rather than normal biological processes. At the bottom of the spreadsheet was a draft email to Derek's brother, who practiced family law. The message outlined her concerns about my mental state and requested information about grandparent rights and potential custody arrangements. She was planning to use my normal pregnancy emotions and reasonable objections to her interference as evidence that I needed psychological evaluation and possibly supervised visitation with my own child. I quickly screenshotted the entire document before she could realize her mistake and delete it. Then I started exploring what else she'd left open on my computer. She'd forgotten to log out of her own email accounts in cloud storage, giving me access to months of correspondence and documents I never could have imagined. What I discovered was a comprehensive campaign to destroy my marriage and gain custody of my child that had been in motion since our wedding day. She'd been documenting every aspect of my life, building a legal case that I was mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and potentially dangerous to Derek and our unborn child. She'd researched postpartum depression statistics, printing articles about women who'd harmed their children and highlighting sections about warning signs. She'd looked into grandparent custody rights in our state, consulting with multiple attorneys about legal grounds for declaring someone an unfit mother. She'd even hired a private investigator to research my family's background, looking for any history of mental illness, addiction, or criminal behavior she could use against me. The private investigator's report was thorough and invasive. He'd interviewed my former teachers, tracked down college classmates, and even spoken to neighbors from my childhood home. He'd found nothing damaging, but she'd paid him to keep looking, convinced that everyone had secrets that could be exposed with enough digging. The most devastating discovery was her ongoing correspondence with Derek's ex-girlfriend, the pediatric surgeon. They'd been in regular contact throughout our entire marriage, with Derek's mother feeding her detailed information about our relationship problems, our financial situation, and our struggles to conceive. The ex-girlfriend was recently divorced, and apparently very interested in reconnecting with Derek, especially now that he was about to become a father. The email chain revealed a calculated plan to slowly drive me to a mental breakdown while positioning the ex-girlfriend as a stable, successful alternative. Derek's mother had been encouraging the ex to reach out to Derek during stressful moments, providing her with inside information about when we were fighting or when I was having difficult pregnancy days. The goal was to create opportunities for emotional infidelity that could be used to justify ending our marriage. The emails discussed timeline and strategy with chilling precision. They planned to wait until after the baby was born, then use my documented instability during pregnancy and the inevitable challenges of new motherhood to build a custody case. The ex-girlfriend would gradually reinsert herself into Derek's life as a supportive friend, eventually becoming the stable parental figure my child deserved. I found correspondence with family court attorneys, child psychologists, and even a psychiatrist who specialized in postpartum mental health evaluations. Derek's mother had been assembling a team of professionals who could testify about my unfitness as a mother, based on the evidence she'd been collecting. There were detailed financial records showing how she planned to support Derek through a divorce and custody battle, including offers to pay for the best legal representation and expert witnesses. She'd even researched private schools and nannies for my child, planning a life that didn't include me at all. The financial planning was extensive. She'd calculated the costs of a prolonged custody battle, researched the most expensive family law attorneys in the city, and set aside money for expert witnesses who could testify about my mental instability. She'd even looked into private investigators who specialized in documenting unfit parenting behavior. But while she'd been focused on destroying me, she'd forgotten to be careful about her communications regarding other family members. Her emails revealed years of manipulation, lies, and financial control over Derek's siblings and their relationships. She'd been the puppet master behind multiple family dramas, creating dependency and chaos to maintain her position of power. I discovered emails where she'd systematically sabotaged Derek's sister's previous relationships by spreading lies to boyfriends about family mental illness and financial instability. She'd convinced multiple men that dating into their family would be complicated and expensive, driving away anyone who might take her daughter's attention and loyalty away from her. She'd hired private investigators to follow Derek's sister's boyfriends, looking for any behavior that could be used to discredit them. She'd fabricated evidence of infidelity, financial irresponsibility, and even criminal activity to convince her daughter that the men she loved were unsuitable and dangerous. There were messages detailing how she'd manipulated Derek's younger brother into breaking up with his fiancée by hiring a private investigator to find compromising photos of the woman at college parties. She'd presented this evidence as proof that the girl was unstable and would embarrass the family, forcing her son to choose between his mother's approval and the woman he loved. The photos had been taken out of context, normal college party pictures that she'd spun into evidence of alcoholism and poor judgment. She'd even had them doctored slightly to make the woman's behavior appear more scandalous than it actually was. Financial records showed how she'd used money as a weapon to control her children's major life decisions throughout their adult lives. She'd threatened to cut off trust fund access, refuse to pay for graduate school, or withdraw promised down payment help whenever any of her children showed signs of independence or made choices she didn't approve of. The financial manipulation was sophisticated and long-term. She'd structured her children's trust funds to give herself maximum control over disbursements, requiring her approval for any major purchases or investments. She'd use this power to veto relationships, career choices, and even living arrangements that didn't meet her standards. Most damaging were her communications with multiple private investigators she'd employed to surveil anyone who threatened her control over her children. She'd had Derek's previous girlfriends followed and investigated, his brother's business partners researched for potential scandals, and even his sister's closest friends monitored because she thought they were bad influences encouraging independence. She'd maintained detailed files on every person who'd ever been close to her children, looking for leverage and ammunition she could use to destroy relationships that competed with her influence. The pattern of control and manipulation went back decades, with dozens of relationships and opportunities systematically destroyed to keep her children dependent and isolated. The surveillance records were extensive and creepy. She'd had people followed to their homes, photographed during private moments, and even had their phones monitored when possible. She'd use this information to create detailed profiles of their weaknesses, fears, and vulnerabilities that she could exploit when necessary. I found evidence that she'd sabotaged Derek's brother's business opportunities by feeding negative information about him to potential partners and investors. She'd convinced him that he wasn't ready for major success and should stick to smaller, safer ventures that kept him financially dependent on the family. She'd even interfered in Derek's sister's educational opportunities, convincing her to turn down scholarships and graduate programs that would have taken her too far from home. She'd fabricated concerns about the quality of distant schools and the dangers of living alone in unfamiliar cities. I printed everything before she realized her mistake and tried to regain control of my laptop. By the time she attempted to grab the computer, I'd already forwarded copies of the most damaging evidence to my personal email and my sister's account as backup. She stood in my office doorway, her sweet grandmother mask finally slipping completely away. Her face contorted with rage as she realized the scope of what I discovered. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she hissed through gritted teeth. "I have lawyers and money and connections you can't even imagine. No one will believe some unstable pregnant teacher over a respected family like ours." That's when I smiled for the first time in months. Because while she'd been busy building her case against me, she'd inadvertently given me everything I needed to expose her decades of manipulation and destroy her credibility with her own family. I told her she had exactly 10 minutes to get out of my house before I called the police and Derek's siblings to share my discoveries. She tried to threaten me, claiming she'd destroy my life and take my child away from me. But her threats felt hollow now that I understood she was just a bitter woman who controlled people through fear and manipulation. She tried one last manipulation tactic, clutching her chest and claiming that the stress of confronting me was triggering her heart condition. When I didn't react with sympathy, she became even more enraged, dropping the pretense of frailty and revealing the calculating person underneath. She left, but not before warning me that this wasn't over. She'd be back with lawyers and evidence of my mental instability. She'd make sure Derek understood what kind of unstable woman he'd married and what kind of mother I'd be to their grandchild. I spent that evening organizing the evidence into clear timelines and categories. I created separate folders for each family member, documenting how she'd manipulated their relationships and controlled their lives. I researched the legal implications of her surveillance activities and her plans to use falsified evidence in custody proceedings. I also called my sister and my best friend, filling them in on everything I discovered. They helped me think through the best way to present this information to Derek and his siblings without overwhelming them or making them feel defensive about their mother. The next morning, I called Derek at work and asked him to come home immediately for an emergency family meeting. I told him to call his siblings and ask them to come over as well, explaining that I had something important to share about his mother's behavior that affected all of them. Derek thought I was going to apologize for being rude to his mother the day before. His siblings assumed I was finally ready to acknowledge that I'd been difficult and unreasonable about their mother's involvement in our lives. Instead, I presented each of them with a thick folder containing years of evidence documenting their mother's systematic manipulation and control. The room fell completely silent as they read through emails, financial records, and surveillance reports that revealed the truth about their family dynamics. Derek's face went white when he saw the custody research and the correspondence with his ex-girlfriend. His sister started crying when she read about the deliberate sabotage of her relationships. His brother, the family attorney, immediately understood the serious legal implications of what their mother had been doing. Derek's sister was the first to speak, her voice shaking with anger and recognition. She talked about relationships that had mysteriously fallen apart after men she'd been dating received anonymous messages about her family's problems. She remembered feeling confused and hurt when boyfriends would suddenly become distant after meeting their mother, not understanding that private investigators had been feeding them negative information about her background. She shared specific stories that now made perfect sense in light of the evidence. A boyfriend who'd suddenly accused her of lying about her family's financial situation. Another who'd broken up with her after claiming he'd heard disturbing things about her mental health history. She'd never understood where these accusations came from, but now she could see her mother's fingerprints all over each sabotaged relationship. Derek's brother shared stories about business deals that had collapsed after his partners received concerning information about his personal life. He talked about opportunities that had been sabotaged and his current marriage, which he now realized had been orchestrated by their mother after she destroyed his relationship with the woman he'd actually loved. He revealed that his mother had introduced him to his current wife immediately after his previous relationship ended, presenting her as the perfect woman from a good family. He'd been vulnerable and heartbroken, making him susceptible to his mother's matchmaking efforts. He now realized that his entire marriage had been arranged by someone who wanted to control his choice of partner. Derek sat frozen, reading through evidence that his mother had been planning to destroy our marriage from the very beginning. He saw the timeline showing how she'd maintained contact with his ex-girlfriend throughout our relationship, feeding her information and encouraging her to interfere. He read her research into custody laws and her plans to use my pregnancy emotions as evidence of mental instability. The evidence showed that Derek's mother had been playing a long game, knowing that destroying our marriage would take time and careful planning. She'd been patient, documenting everything and building her case while maintaining the facade of a loving, concerned grandmother. When Derek finally called his mother to confront her, she denied everything at first, claiming I had fabricated the evidence out of jealousy and mental instability. But when Derek's brother, with his legal training, pointed out the digital timestamps, metadata, and third-party correspondence that corroborated everything, her story began to fall apart. She tried different tactics, claiming she was just looking out for Derek's best interests, insisting that I really was unstable and she was trying to protect her grandchild, arguing that her other children were too naive to see how they were being manipulated by inappropriate partners. But faced with documented evidence of years of surveillance, financial manipulation, and systematic relationship sabotage, she couldn't maintain her denials. The confrontation lasted for hours, with each sibling sharing memories and experiences that suddenly made sense in light of the evidence. They talked about relationships that had ended abruptly, career opportunities that had disappeared mysteriously, and major life decisions they'd made based on information that now seemed suspiciously convenient for their mother's preferences. Derek's sister revealed that their mother had shown her fake evidence that a man she'd been planning to marry was cheating on her. The proof had been fabricated by one of the private investigators, but it had been convincing enough to destroy her engagement and send her into a depression that lasted for years. She'd never fully recovered her ability to trust romantic partners. Derek's brother admitted that their mother had used financial pressure and emotional manipulation to force him into his current marriage, threatening to withhold his inheritance and cut off family support if he didn't choose someone she approved of. He realized that his wife had been essentially selected by his mother, not chosen by him based on love or compatibility. Derek himself began to understand how many of his major life decisions had been influenced by his mother's manipulation. She'd driven away previous girlfriends through subtle campaigns of undermining and sabotage. She'd influenced his career choices by threatening to withdraw financial support for paths she didn't approve of. Even his decision to marry me had been partially motivated by her disapproval, which he'd mistaken for independence and rebellion. By the end of the day, Derek was sleeping in the guest room, overwhelmed by the realization that his mother had orchestrated years of family drama and controlled his life in ways he'd never imagined. His siblings weren't speaking to their mother at all, finally understanding that the close, loving family they thought they had was actually a carefully constructed illusion, held together by fear, money, and manipulation. The next few days were difficult as Derek processed the extent of his mother's control over his life. He went through old emails and text messages, seeing patterns of manipulation he'd never noticed before. He remembered conversations where she'd planted doubts about my intentions or criticized my character in subtle ways. 3 days later, Derek filed for a restraining order against his mother on behalf of our immediate family. His siblings quickly followed suit, each obtaining legal protection against further surveillance and harassment. The woman who had controlled every aspect of their lives for decades suddenly found herself completely cut off from her children and unable to contact them directly. Derek's brother, using his legal expertise and connections, helped us secure our home and finances against any potential retaliation. He also researched the legality of his mother's surveillance activities and found that she'd likely violated multiple privacy laws in her campaign against me and her interference in his siblings' relationships. He discovered that her use of private investigators to monitor family members without their consent could constitute stalking and harassment. Her interference in business relationships and romantic partnerships could be grounds for civil lawsuits. Her plans to use falsified evidence in custody proceedings could result in criminal charges. Derek's sister packed up and moved across the country within 2 weeks, finally free to restart her life away from their mother's influence and control. She'd been accepted to a graduate program years earlier but had been pressured to decline because their mother didn't want her living so far away. Now she was finally pursuing her own dreams and building relationships without interference. Derek himself entered intensive therapy to process the years of emotional manipulation and learn to make decisions based on his own values, rather than his mother's expectations. He had to confront the reality that many of his beliefs about family loyalty and duty had been manufactured by someone who used those concepts to control him. The therapy helped him understand how his mother had conditioned him to prioritize her feelings over everyone else's, including his own wife's. He learned to recognize the manipulation tactics she'd used and develop healthier boundaries for future relationships. When our daughter was born 2 months later, she met only the grandparents who had earned the right to be in her life through respect, support, and healthy boundaries. My parents, who had always treated Derek with kindness and respect, were thrilled to welcome their first grandchild. They understood the importance of supporting our decisions as parents, and never tried to undermine our authority or insert themselves into situations where they weren't welcome. Derek's mother sent gifts and cards through intermediaries, all of which we returned unopened. She tried using distant relatives and family friends to deliver messages about how much she missed her grandchild and how sorry she was for any misunderstandings. But we'd made our position clear. Any relationship would require complete acknowledgement of her actions and significant changes in behavior that we didn't believe she was capable of making. She hired multiple lawyers to demand grandparent visitation rights, claiming that we were denying her the chance to have a relationship with her grandchild based on fabricated evidence and mental instability on my part. But Derek's brother helped us fight every legal attempt, and the documented evidence of her manipulation and surveillance made her case impossible to pursue successfully. The lawyers she consulted were initially sympathetic to her claims about being unfairly cut off from her grandchild. But when Derek's brother presented the evidence of her surveillance activities, her plans to fabricate mental health concerns, and her systematic manipulation of the entire family, they quickly withdrew from her case. No reputable attorney wanted to be associated with someone who had engaged in such extensive stalking and harassment. 6 months after our daughter was born, I learned through Derek's uncle that his mother had been financially cut off by her own mother, Derek's grandmother, who had finally seen through the manipulation when Derek's siblings presented her with the evidence we'd gathered. Derek's grandmother had been quietly concerned about family dynamics for years, but hadn't understood the extent of her daughter's control until she saw the documented proof. Derek's grandmother revealed that she'd noticed strange patterns over the years, relationships in the family that ended abruptly, business opportunities that disappeared mysteriously, and her grandchildren's reluctance to share details about their personal lives. She'd attributed these things to normal family drama, not realizing that her own daughter was orchestrating much of the chaos. Without access to family money, Derek's mother couldn't afford the expensive lawyers and private investigators she'd relied on to control and intimidate people. Her threats became empty, and her ability to interfere in our lives disappeared along with her financial resources. She was forced to move from her expensive apartment to a smaller place and take a part-time job for the first time in decades. Derek's ex-girlfriend, the pediatric surgeon, sent me a handwritten apology letter 6 months later, explaining how Derek's mother had manipulated her into believing our marriage was troubled and that Derek was trapped with someone mentally unstable. She'd been led to believe she was helping Derek escape an unhappy situation, not realizing she was being used as a weapon to destroy our family. In her letter, she explained how Derek's mother had contacted her shortly after our wedding, claiming to be concerned about Derek's happiness. She'd been told that I was controlling and jealous, preventing Derek from maintaining friendships with anyone from his past. Derek's mother had painted herself as a worried parent, trying to help her son reconnect with people who truly cared about him. The manipulation had been gradual and sophisticated. Derek's mother would share carefully selected information about our marriage difficulties, always framing herself as someone who wanted Derek to be happy, but was powerless to help. She'd suggest that Derek might benefit from talking to someone who knew him well, someone who could offer perspective on his situation. The ex-girlfriend admitted that she'd been vulnerable to this manipulation because she'd always regretted how their relationship had ended and wondered if they might have had a future together. Derek's mother had fed into these feelings, suggesting that Derek felt the same way, but was trapped in a marriage he couldn't escape. She'd since blocked all contact with Derek's mother and wanted us to know that she had no interest in interfering in our marriage. She was actually engaged to a colleague and happy in her own life. She felt terrible about being used as a weapon against our family and hoped we could eventually forgive her role in the situation. A year later, Derek's sister got engaged to a wonderful man she met in her new city, someone she chose entirely on her own without any family interference or pressure. For the first time in her adult life, she was able to develop a relationship without someone investigating her boyfriend's background or planting doubts about his intentions. She told us that learning to trust her own judgment had been the hardest part of recovery from their mother's manipulation. She'd become so accustomed to second-guessing herself and looking for approval that making independent decisions felt terrifying at first. But with therapy and distance from her mother's influence, she was finally learning to trust her instincts and build healthy relationships. Derek's brother filed for divorce from the wife his mother had essentially forced him to marry and began dating someone he'd actually chosen for himself based on compatibility and genuine affection. The divorce was amicable since his wife admitted she'd also felt pressured into the marriage by both their families and had never been truly happy. He discovered that his wife had been as much a victim of their mother's manipulation as he had been. She'd been told that Derek's brother was wealthy and successful, but struggling with commitment issues due to a previous heartbreak. She'd been positioned as the stable, appropriate woman who could help him settle down and fulfill his potential. Derek himself has become the father and husband I always knew he could be without his mother's toxic influence constantly undermining his confidence and independence. He's learned to trust his own judgment, set appropriate boundaries, and prioritize our family's well-being over external expectations and demands. The transformation in Derek has been remarkable. Without his mother's constant criticism and manipulation, he's become more confident in his parenting decisions and more supportive of my choices as a mother. He's learned to recognize manipulation tactics and refuses to engage with anyone who tries to control him through guilt or emotional blackmail. As for Derek's mother, the last we heard she was living alone in a modest apartment across town, estranged from all her children and grandchildren. She occasionally tries to contact us through distant relatives or family friends, but we've made it clear to everyone that any relationship would require genuine acknowledgement of her actions, extensive therapy, and a complete change in behavior that we don't believe she's capable of making. Some family members have tried to convince us to give her another chance, arguing that she's elderly and alone and that family should forgive. But we've explained that forgiveness doesn't mean exposing ourselves or our daughter to someone who spent decades systematically manipulating and surveilling family members. Some people are too dangerous to have in your life, regardless of their relationship to you. Derek's uncle has kept us informed about her situation, mostly to warn us if she seems to be planning any new attempts to contact us. She's tried to hire private investigators to gather information about our current lives, but without access to family money, she can't afford the level of surveillance she once employed. She's also attempted to use social media to monitor our activities, but we've blocked her and her known associates from all our accounts. Sometimes Derek still feels guilty about cutting off his mother completely, especially during holidays or family milestones when he remembers the mother he thought he had rather than the manipulator she actually was. But then he looks at our daughter, healthy and happy in a home free from manipulation and control, and he remembers why we had to protect our family from someone who viewed relationships as games to be won rather than bonds to be cherished. Derek's siblings have all expressed gratitude for my decision to expose their mother's manipulation, even though it was initially painful and disruptive. They've each found healthier relationships and greater independence since cutting contact with her. They've learned to make decisions based on their own values and desires, rather than fear of their mother's disapproval or retaliation. We've become closer as a family unit, supporting each other through the process of recovery from years of manipulation and control. Derek's siblings are wonderful aunts and uncles to our daughter, and we've created new holiday traditions that focus on love and support, rather than obligation and performance. The extended family has largely taken our side once they understood the full scope of Derek's mother's manipulation. Derek's grandmother has been particularly supportive, expressing regret that she didn't see through her daughter's behavior sooner. She's become a wonderful great-grandmother to our daughter, and has helped us understand that cutting contact was not only appropriate, but necessary. Breaking up her family wasn't revenge. It was liberation for everyone she'd been slowly destroying through decades of control and manipulation. Sometimes the only way to save the people you love is to remove the person who's systematically poisoning their ability to trust their own judgment and form healthy relationships. The woman who had seemed so loving and devoted was revealed to be someone who viewed her children as possessions to be controlled rather than individuals to be supported and celebrated. Her version of love was actually a sophisticated form of abuse that kept her family trapped in cycles of dependency and fear. Understanding this has helped Derek process his childhood and recognize that many of the family values he was raised with were actually tools of manipulation designed to keep him compliant and dependent. He's had to rebuild his understanding of what healthy family relationships look like, using our marriage and our relationships with my parents as examples. Now our daughter is growing up in a family where healthy boundaries are respected, where love doesn't come with conditions and manipulation, and where she'll learn to trust her own instincts rather than constantly seeking approval from someone who uses affection as a weapon. That's the real victory. Not the destruction of Derek's mother's control, but the creation of something genuine and healthy in its place. We've been careful to document our reasons for cutting contact with Derek's mother, knowing that our daughter might have questions as she gets older. We've saved all the evidence of her grandmother's manipulation so that if our daughter ever wonders why she doesn't have a relationship with Derek's side of the family, we can explain the situation age-appropriately and help her understand that sometimes protecting your family means making difficult decisions. Our daughter will grow up knowing that love should feel safe and supportive, not controlling and conditional. She'll learn that healthy relationships involve respect for boundaries and individual autonomy. Most importantly, she'll understand that family loyalty doesn't mean accepting abuse or manipulation from people who happen to be related to you. The experience has made Derek and me stronger as a couple and more intentional as parents. We've learned to communicate more effectively about boundaries and family relationships. We've developed a deeper appreciation for genuine love and support, having experienced firsthand how different it feels from manipulation disguised as caring. We still occasionally hear updates about Derek's mother through family members, mostly warnings about new attempts to gather information about our lives, or contact our daughter through school or community activities. She's tried to volunteer at organizations where she might encounter our daughter, but we've been proactive about alerting schools and activity coordinators about the situation. The legal protections Derek's brother helped us establish have been crucial in maintaining our safety and peace of mind. We have restraining orders that prevent direct contact, and we've documented all her attempts to circumvent these restrictions. This evidence will be important if she ever escalates her behavior or tries to claim that we're unreasonably preventing her from having a relationship with her grandchild. 3 years later, our family is thriving. Derek has been promoted at work, partly because he's more confident and decisive without his mother's constant undermining of his judgment. I've returned to teaching and love sharing stories about our daughter with my students. Our daughter is a happy, confident toddler who loves spending time with her grandfather, fixing things in his workshop, and helping her grandmother in the garden. We've created the kind of family Derek's mother claimed to want, close, loving, and supportive, but without the manipulation and control that made her version of family love feel suffocating and dangerous. Our daughter is surrounded by adults who celebrate her independence and encourage her to develop her own interests and opinions. The contrast between our current family life and what Derek experienced growing up has been eye-opening for both of us. He's amazed by how peaceful family gatherings can be when no one is trying to control or manipulate anyone else. He loves watching our daughter interact with my parents, seeing what unconditional love and support actually look like. Sometimes I wonder if Derek's mother realizes what she lost by choosing control over genuine connection. She could have been a loving grandmother who played an important role in our daughter's life. Instead, she'll remain a stranger to her granddaughter, remembered only as a cautionary tale about how manipulation destroys the very relationships it claims to protect. But ultimately, her choices led to consequences that protected our family from someone who was genuinely dangerous to our well-being and happiness. The woman who tried to break up my marriage ended up breaking up her own family instead, proving that sometimes the person who's most destructive to family unity is the one who claims to care about it the most. Our story has a happy ending because we were willing to make the difficult choice to prioritize our family's safety and mental health over social expectations about maintaining relationships with relatives. Sometimes love means saying no to people who claim to love you, but consistently treat you with manipulation and disrespect. Now, our daughter will grow up in a home where love feels safe, where boundaries are respected, and where family means support and celebration, rather than control and obligation. That's the future Derek's mother tried to steal from us, and that's the victory we achieved by refusing to let her succeed.